Welcome back everyone to the weekly Mailbox episode number 50. Awesome that we've made it this far. Technically, we did have a few spin-off episodes, as I like to call them, before rebooting the series, doing it on a weekly basis, and we've almost made it a whole year of mailboxes, but I think 50, that's special enough. But if for some reason you've never come across the mailbox, this is your chance, your weekly chance, to ask me questions about anything you would like. Formula 1, Formula E, motorsports, anything in between. And if you want to be featured in next week's episode, all you've got to do is leave a question in the comment section down below, the YouTube community page, Twitter or Instagram. And as always, I'll pick my 5 favourites each week. And I want to start this week off from a question from Sakti Kahaya. Based on the first 3 races, Mercedes shows that their dominance still continues. Do you think there's any chance that a driver or constructor can challenge Mercedes' dominance? Thank you for your question. And I wanted to start here because I feel it was quite fitting that one of the, I suppose, themes throughout every single mailbox, even the little spin-off ones that I did in the very first year of my channel, before I even had 1,000, perhaps even 500 subscribers, a constant from, I think it was about the 2018 Chinese Grand Prix. Ever since then, the one constant has been that Mercedes has been the best car. That's pretty much the only one. And ever since that time, we are still in this situation where Mercedes are the team to beat. And it's more than fair in the sense that they realistically have the best driver in Formula 1. Verstappen's getting there, but Hamilton still is the undisputed champion. And they've got a solid number 2 in Valtteri Bottas. They've got a fantastic aerodynamics department, a brilliant engine and power unit department. Toto Wolff's fantastic, James Allison's fantastic, and all of those factors put together, you can understand why they are the most dominant team in F1. Is it boring? Well, it can be. Is it disappointing? Well, I've said in my race reviews this season already that if you take Mercedes out of the equation this year, what a season we would be having at the moment, with Red Bull last weekend slipping back into that midfield a little bit, Ferrari dropping into that midfield, McLaren, Renault, Racing Point moving forward. So without Mercedes, these last 4 or 5 years would be insane. However, is that Mercedes' fault? No, because they've just been better than everyone else. And in theory, and I've always held this opinion, it's up for the other teams to catch up. It's up to those other teams to sign better aerodynamicists, better engineers, better drivers. And a team like McLaren is a perfect example of that. I've completely restructured that entire team. It's taken Zach Brown a very long time to do that, but he's brought Andreas Seidel on board, James Key as well, moving from Toro Rosso it was. He's been so instrumental in their performance change over the last couple of years. And Norris and Sainz was a real refreshing lineup. And altogether as a package, you can see now that those benefits are starting to come out. They're nowhere near Mercedes as of yet, but the progress they've made is clear that sometimes once you've got that structure in place, teams can just get better and better and better. And Mercedes, their proof's in the pudding really. Ever since Hamilton joined, and even when Rosberg was there, they had 2 world-class drivers, a team set up that was perfect for a World Championship fight. You can still see now there's been very, very little fallouts within that team. Even the Hamilton-Rosberg fallout, yes, it was big, but not cataclysmic for the team. Bottas-Hamilton's much calmer, and you can see why they're doing so good. So, to stop dodging the question, will it ever end? Who's going to end it? When will it end? It's so difficult. I think we'd all like to say in 2022, when there's that brand new big regulation change. I hoped, well, not necessarily hoped, but I thought the dominance at least would end this year. I thought Ferrari were going to be able to improve from last year with a better chassis. I didn't expect their engine to get so much worse. I think none of us expected that. And if they did have last year's engine in that car, they probably would be right there with Mercedes. I think a lot of us thought Red Bull would be able to challenge a lot closer this year. But it's been Ferrari's and Red Bull's failings that have allowed Mercedes to make that gap once again. And I think next year it will be a similar story, with the cars for the most part remaining the exact same. Whether Ferrari can sort their engine, that's something they will be able to change, and maybe they'll be a little bit closer, but it's unlikely. So 2022 is going to be that huge regulation change, which even if Mercedes are still the quickest car, the whole regulation period is designed to bring the whole field gap closer together anyway. So even if Mercedes are the quickest, the gap between the first, second, third, even fourth and fifth potentially is going to be a lot smaller. Hopefully. Anyway, that's what they're designed to do. So my gut instinct is to say 22, but I still think you'd be silly to discount the likes of Hamilton and Mercedes as real title challengers in 22. But then I suppose you look back to 2014. Red Bull was so dominant before 2014. Not as dominant as Mercedes are now, but still, Vettel had won 4 World Championship. They come to 2014 and Vettel doesn't win a single race over the course of that year. Ferrari drop mightily back into that midfield fight. McLaren, we all know what happened to them, scored that podium or double podium in the first race and didn't score another podium until last season. So a big regulation change can shape up the field nicely. It can mix things up. And I do think for Mercedes, that will be the first kind of showing where they could drop back. Not necessarily into that midfield, but certainly into the clutches of teams like your Ferraris, your Red Bulls, your McLarens and your Renaults. Teams like that. Question number 2, something slightly different, but I wanted to pick up on this. Comes from Glenn Robertson. Formula E is having the absolute silliest of seasons right now. Silly season, if you're not aware, is usually a term we use when we're talking about the driver transfer market, and he's not wrong. It is crazy at the moment. Do you think the driver swapping and uncertainty will negatively affect those teams at the upcoming Berlin rounds? I'm going to do a whole separate video, a whole transfer talk, talking about Formula E. I think I've mentioned that maybe on a couple of the live streams we've done over on Twitch, but I don't know if I've ever said that in a video. But yeah, next week or at the weekend it will be, probably Sunday, a transfer talk Formula E special, because there's been so many transfers. The biggest one, I would say, maybe Pascal Wehrlein, but we're not quite sure where he's going to end up. But Sam Bird moving away from Virgin, moving to Jaguar. I would have done a video on it, but it just so happened I was at work that day. But I tell you what, that is such a dramatic change. Formula E, one of the things you just expect is Degrassi in an Audi and Bird in a Virgin. That's pretty much how it's been since day one. And Sam Bird, who's won the only driver to win a race in every single season at the moment. Degrassi can also claim or join that record if he wins in these final few rounds in Berlin. But that is such a huge change. And that's one of so many. And that's why I'm going to do a full separate video. Because even today we've got news that Sete Camara is going to race for Dragon in these final few rounds. And like Glenn kind of says in his question, will this negatively affect teams? It's just so unclear because there's so many driver transfers where they're staying, like Sam Bird, he's doing the last few rounds with Virgin and then moving on. You've got then like Wehrlein, who's already left the team, and in his place it's Alex Lynn, isn't it? He's returning. So Wehrlein is out of the picture. How is that going to affect Mahindra as a team, getting Lynn back up to speed? You've got Daniel Abt, he's making a return to Neo. He's dropped from Audi and Rast is coming in his place, so he'll make his debut for Neo. How's that going to affect them? I think that's going to be for the better, actually. Having Turvey and Abt, I think it's a very strong lineup for them. And then you've got drivers, like I say, like Sam Bird. We're not quite sure what they're going to do. Looks like Brendan Hartley could be the one losing out to Sete Camara. It's all just a real transfer mess. And even Sam Bird, we're not quite sure who he's going to replace at Jaguar. Most likely it's going to be James Collado. But again, we're unsure. Neil Yarni, is this going to be these final few races at Porsche? We really don't know. The only team probably in safe hands is Mercedes. I do not see them changing either of their drivers in Stoffel Van Dorn and Nick de Vries. However, something for them to consider is these 6 races in Berlin are kind of squashed between 2 Formula 1 races. And if any of the drivers at Mercedes, McLaren and Racing Point, if they get ill or can't do either of the British Grand Prix for whatever reason, it's Van Dorn or de Vries that will fill those seats in F1. So they could potentially be facing an opportunity where they're losing one of their drivers. So the majority of teams going into these 6 races are a bit uneasy, I would say. BMW are probably safe, and Techeetah as well. And I think it's going to be, to go back to the question, what kind of effect this is going to have, I really do think it's a case-by-case basis, because Sam Bird's going to drive his heart out, try and get that championship. He's still totally in the running for it, to round off his career nicely at the Virgin team. But it's going to be a real carnage. 6 days or 9 days with 6 races involved. And I, for one, cannot wait. But a more in-depth and structured analysis on Sunday. Question number 3 comes from Broomhandle F1. What is the future of Pierre Gasly in F1? He can't stay in the Red Bull Junior team or AlphaTauri forever. I'll quickly mention or talk about this because we did a quite sizable mailbox video with the title about the future of Gasly, and it was the lead question, so we usually spend a little bit longer on the lead question. But things have changed since then, because my real answer I gave to the question a couple of months ago before the season started was that Gasly's best option was to impress this season and get that seat at Renault alongside Esteban Ocon. Well, that door's closed. So now where does he look? Because I really do think that would have been a great option for Renault, and it would have been a real good target for Gasly to prove his worth this year. And I will say Gasly, I think, has had a very impressive season so far in 2020, all things considered, especially last weekend with that, what seemed like every session, his engine blowing up. However, he's got to be looking for a stronger drive in that midfield. And what I mean by that is a team that really want him to be there. And that's nothing against AlphaTauri. I'm sure they're loving having Pierre drive for them. He is their lead driver, I think it's more than fair to say. And he's doing a better job than teammate Danny Kvyat. But what's always difficult with AlphaTauri is the team's aspirations. They want to be a solid midfield car. I'm sure the mechanics and engineers, everyone involved, wants to be winning it on the podium. But the team is there to be a Red Bull Junior team and to help promote younger drivers. And Red Bull do have 2 very capable and strong drivers in F2, in Yuki Tsunoda and Jehan Daruvala. They probably will have a couple of seasons in F2, but certainly that will be piling a little bit of pressure on Kvyat and Gasly. And for Gasly, who has done so well in that Toro Rosso, probably deserves a chance at a team a little bit further up in that midfield. But what opportunities realistically are there? Racing Point / Aston Martin are pretty much done, whether they're sticking with what they've got now or bringing in Vettel. I don't see that changing. There's no way Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, their doors are all shut. Renault as well. The only potential one really would be that drive at Red Bull. If Albon didn't, for whatever reason, continue the way he's been doing, if he really messes up over the next couple of rounds in Silverstone, but I don't see that happening. Red Bull as well will probably be cautious about bringing Gasly back to the team, and it will probably take something awful from Albon, whether it's some kind of dangerous driving or just ridiculously bad performances. It would need something really special from Gasly as well for Red Bull to promote him back to the team, considering how he struggled there last year. Does he take a gamble then on a team like Haas, a team like Alfa Romeo? Well, judging on their performances this year, you'd say probably not. And Williams as well, they'd probably love to have a driver like Gasly if a George Russell moves on. But is that too big of a risk for a driver like Gasly? So now that Renault door is shut, and I'm a big fan of Pierre Gasly, I think what he's been able to do in his first full year at Toro Rosso, his second half last year and so far this year, warrants a better drive. But at the moment, any of the opportunities available, realistically, we're talking about Alfa Romeo or Haas, isn't as attractive as the opportunity available at AlphaTauri to lead that team. So for Pierre, I think he's going to have to just sit in tight at the moment. Just play it a couple of years at this team. Try and continually beat Kvyat, and then if a junior comes up, beat them. In a couple of years' time, with 2022 regulations, maybe AlphaTauri will be more in the fight in that midfield. He'll be able to prove himself even more. And then there may be an opportunity at Red Bull if the driver market explodes with Hamilton retiring, if Vettel retires, if we've got Grosjean, Perez, Raikkonen, all of these more experienced drivers, if they're moving on. Maybe then Gasly will get more of an opportunity if Verstappen moves to a Ferrari potentially, or if Verstappen moves to a Mercedes. You know what I mean. I think Gasly's best option is to stay where he is and then look elsewhere. But it's a really interesting one, and I'm looking forward to seeing how his career develops. Question number 4 comes from Sihari Desai. Has Ricciardo scored a dream seat with McLaren Mercedes? Well, Ferrari being slow, or will Ferrari improve? I think Ricciardo has nailed this one, which I well, I think if you've been fans of the channel for a while, you'll know I was sceptical about a Ricciardo move to McLaren. Nothing against McLaren, but I felt their 1 year last year, though incredible it was being at the front of that midfield, their previous 3 or 4 years suggested that they could be a team that could go up one season and down the next. But so far so good in 2020, continuing their development. And I spoke earlier, didn't I, about all the changes Zach Brown has implemented team-wide, and it's going well. So from a team point of view, McLaren is going to suit Daniel Ricciardo down to a T. Alongside Norris, that's going to be such another breath of fresh air. It was when Sainz and Norris came in, and I think Ricciardo is going to bring a bit of a different spin, but to help the team move forward, ultimately I think it'll be a great spin. I do think he's a driver capable, though, of being a top team. Ferraris, your Red Bulls, your Mercedes. I do really strongly believe that, and I think when you look at Ocon's performances this year and how much hype he's been able to develop over the last few years, being a highly rated Mercedes young driver, I think really highlights the power Ricciardo has in Formula One and his ability. I mean, look how he performed against Hulkenberg last year. He took him out of a Formula One seat, and yet 2018, Hulkenberg was clearly the best of the rest. So I think this move to Renault has done Ricciardo, I think, a lot of good. Though he can sometimes go under the radar a little bit and have a quiet weekend, because of the fact that Renault isn't the best in the midfield, I still think moving away from Red Bull was the right decision, and now ultimately, technically becoming the lead driver at McLaren, although that's going to be a fun scrap to see between him and Norris, I think that's exactly what he envisioned when moving to Renault. Though Renault are a bit more corporate, a little bit more between the lines, not as fun, I would say, as McLaren. I think that's a fair statement, and I think that's going to really bring out Ricciardo's personality, not just off track, but on track as well. The team are going to want to give him a car that can be racy, that are going to suit his driving style late on the brakes. And with Mercedes coming on board, that car's going to be quick. The car's pretty much going to stay like it is this year. We've already seen the team pick up a podium in Austria. They didn't do so well last weekend in Hungary, but they still weren't a million miles away from the likes of Ferrari, Racing Point as well. So I'm really liking this McLaren-Mercedes project, and Ricciardo and Norris is going to be a great lineup. And looking at where Ferrari are now, looking at the fact they're moving backwards and kind of this transition period they're going to have to go into, I think Ricciardo has made a perfect choice, to be totally honest with you. And I'll happily eat my words on that, because 6 months ago, I really probably would have criticised him for it. But fair play to him. He's really thought out this move, and it looks like it's all working the way of Danny Rick, and I can't wait to see him closer to that podium over the next couple of years. But hey, just quickly before we move on to the final question, Renault still don't have an awful car this year, so if they can develop, maybe we'll be saying in 6 months' time next year that he was silly to move away from the project at Renault. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. And our final question comes from Sam Castevans. When will Haas get their first podium, or will they ever get it done? This, of course, question number 5, our final question of today's mailbox, our audience participation question. And on episode 50, I had to do a Haas question, didn't I, for audience participation. Thank you for your question, Sam. When will Haas get their first podium? God, this is tricky, because we all know 2018 was probably their best shot over that season. Their car was great. Grosjean got their best ever result in 4th place in Austria, super close. But even then, that was relying on 2 Mercedes DNFs, and their pace was never quite on the top 3. But you look at a season like this season, where we've got Mercedes at the top, the big dogs, Red Bull second, but then it's a scrap for that midfield. This is one of those seasons where Haas realistically needed to be a little bit further up, needed to be challenging. But we know the issue they're not further up, likewise with Alfa Romeo, and the reason Ferrari aren't in that top 3 is because of that engine. So when will Haas get their first podium? Not this season, is my answer. If they didn't do it last weekend with that great bit of strategy, it's not going to be this season, that's for sure. And will they ever get it done? That is so difficult to call. But what I will say, and I said it earlier, I think 2022 is a huge opportunity for teams in that midfield to move forward. And for a team like Haas, it's a great opportunity for them to get parts of Ferrari that are nice and up to date. Hope that Ferrari engine is in the fight, and hope that Ferrari, their lack of performance this year is in a way helping them develop 2022's engine, potentially. We'll have to wait and see. However, I have said it before, I think the big thing for Haas at the moment, and they have a great opportunity to do it over the next couple of years, is to have a big refresh. And it hates me to say it, it pains me to say it, but when you've got drivers in F2 that are part of that Ferrari Young Driver Academy, that there's a lot of them in that field that could jump up to F1 next year, not just through talent, but super license points as well, Haas have got to take advantage of that. Alfa Romeo could have 2 seats. There's potential they'll have 2 seats, but I'm not too sure whether that team that are still at heart the Sauber team will want to give up both their seats. They love Giovinazzi, they love Kimi. Kimi looks like he's going to retire, and Giovinazzi probably won't be as good or as exciting as an opportunity, that's a better way of putting it, for Ferrari to have in that seat. And they will probably look at having a Schwartzman or a Schumacher in that car. And probably, I'm assuming that Alfa will just keep Giovinazzi as their own driver, as the Sauber seat, and then the Ferrari seat will go to a Schwartzman, let's say, for example. But in that example, that means that Schumacher and Ilott don't have a seat in F1. Yet, both of them, I would admit this year, are going to be fighting for the title in F2. So for Haas, I think you've got to try and nick one of those drivers. They've got great ties with Ferrari. They've got 2 ageing drivers. Q drivers prone to mistakes. Magnussen and Grosjean on their day can be great. Both of them had great weekends this weekend in Hungary. But the first 2 rounds of the season, the car's very difficult to drive, so I don't want to hurt and have a go at them too much. But a driver like Schwartzman, what an opportunity to throw them into. We've seen Russell last weekend in Hungary. He's got a bad car. He got it through almost to Q3. And I think maybe that bit of young talent to push either Magnussen or Grosjean, probably K-Mag, would be a great bit of fresh air. And with a driver like Perez or even Hülkenberg on the sidelines, I think maybe having a complete driver refresh wouldn't be a totally bad idea either. But I think for them, target number 1 is to just survive the next couple of years in F1. I think they'll be fine, but that's target number 1. I think getting a Ferrari Junior that doesn't move up to F1 with Alfa Romeo, and then I think assess the driver market in a couple of years, whether that's a Perez, a Gasly, whoever. Bring back a Sebastian Vettel if he's had a couple of years out of F1. And I'll leave that there. Will Haas get a podium? I think they will, but I think we'll have to wait a little while. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, if you want to submit your question for next week, comment section down below, community page, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. If you've made it this far and you haven't already subscribed, feel free to do so. The red button is down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, dislike if you didn't, and I hope to see you all in the next one.